Have you ever really thought about just how different life in India was, say, 200 years ago? I mean, the rights and freedoms we might see as totally normal today were, back then, pretty much unthinkable. So, how did India get from that world to the one we know now? Well, that's the story we're going to dive into.
I mean, just look at this contrast. 2 centuries back, child marriage was the norm. Widows were forbidden from ever remarrying, and in some places, a truly horrific practice called sati was still a reality. Education for women? Nope, virtually non-existent. Fast forward to today, and every single one of those things has been completely overturned by law. So the big question is, how on earth did such a massive social transformation actually happen?
To really get the scale of the change, you have to understand what came before. This painting here shows sati, where a widow was burned on her husband's funeral pyre. Whether she was willing or forced, she was called a sati, which means a virtuous woman. This was the brutal reality that a new generation of thinkers and activists looked at and said, no more.
All right, so the real fight for change kicked off in the early 19th century. It was this perfect storm, a combination of new ideas, new technologies, and some incredibly courageous people who started to question centuries of tradition.
So, what was the spark? Well, a huge part of it was printing. All of a sudden, books, newspapers, pamphlets, they were cheap and they were accessible. Ideas could travel like wildfire. In the new, growing cities, people were debating everything. Social customs, politics, religion, and right at the heart of it all were these Indian reformers who just knew society had to change.
And one of the earliest, most influential figures was Raja Rama Mohan Roy. He started a reform group called the Brahmo Samaj in Calcutta. He was passionate about spreading Western education, and he was determined to win freedom and equality for women. He was especially horrified by the practice of sati. Okay, so you have to hear this, because the strategy these reformers came up with was absolutely brilliant. Now, in a society that deeply respected tradition, you couldn't just attack a custom head-on. You'd be dismissed instantly. So instead, they went inside the tradition. They'd take a practice like sati, and then they'd comb through ancient sacred texts until they found a verse that actually supported their point of view. Then they could argue that the awful things happening weren't real tradition at all, but a recent corruption of it. It was a total masterstroke. They used the very source of authority, the sacred texts, to dismantle the oppressive customs. Just genius.
And you know what? This strategy worked. Ram Mohan Roy used these arguments to campaign against sati, and in 1829 it was officially banned. That was a monumental first step. Then came a law in 1856 allowing widows to remarry, and later, in 1929, the Child Marriage Restraint Act was passed. These were real, tangible victories, all born from decades of intense debate and struggle.
But banning sati, as huge as it was just the beginning. The fight got bigger, tackling other deep-rooted customs around widowhood, child marriage, and, so importantly, a woman's right to an education and a voice of her own.
So following that same playbook, the famous reformer Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar used ancient texts to prove that widows could remarry. Now, a law was passed in 1856, but conservative groups fought back hard, and very few widows were actually able to remarry for a long time. At the same time, reformers were also challenging the custom of child marriage, a fight that would go on for decades.
The battle for education was just as tough. I mean, can you believe this? People actually believed that if you educated a girl, it would cause her husband to die. This was a really widespread superstition. People also worried that schools would pull girls away from their duties at home, or that just traveling through public places to get to school would somehow corrupt them.
And this picture, it's just the perfect answer to all those fears. Despite all the opposition, schools for girls did start to open. This is a photograph of students at the Hindu Mahalla Vidyalaya back in 1875. This was one of the very first schools to give girls the exact same kind of education that boys got, which was a truly radical idea for its time.
So what happens when women get educated? They start to speak for themselves. Now I want you to really listen to this question, posed in the 1880s. Isn't a woman's life as dear to her as yours is to you? It's as if women are meant to be made of something different from men altogether. Just think about that. Who do you think was asking this, directly challenging the idea that men and women were valued differently?
The author was Tarabai Shinde, a woman who was educated at home in Pune. Her book, Stripur's Chalana, was this fiery critique of the social double standards for men and women. And this really marks a crucial turning point. It's when women themselves became the leading voices in the fight for their own rights. And here's another incredible figure,
Pandita Ramabai. She was a brilliant Sanskrit scholar who felt that Hinduism was deeply oppressive towards women, and she wrote a whole book about the miserable lives of upper-caste Hindu widows. But she didn't just write, she took action. She founded a home for widows where they were trained with actual skills so they could support themselves financially.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit, because running parallel to this huge struggle for women's rights was another, equally profound battle, the fight against the injustices of the caste system.
For centuries, Indian society was strictly divided by caste. You had Brahmins and Kshatriyas at the top, the so-called upper castes, below them traders, peasants, and artisans, and then at the very bottom were people forced into jobs that were considered polluting. They were treated as untouchable, seen as inferior, and denied basic human dignity, barred from temples, from public wells, you name it.
And this system wasn't some abstract idea. It shaped people's entire lives. On the left here, you can see the Dubalis of Gujarat, who worked the fields for upper-caste landowners. And on the right, the Madigas of Andhra Pradesh. They were skilled leather workers, but that job was considered polluting because it involved dead animals. This system dictated everything.
Now, while many upper-caste reformers spoke out against the caste system, the most powerful challenges, well, they came from within the so-called lower castes themselves. Leaders started to emerge from these communities, organizing movements that demanded equality and worked to build a sense of pride and self-esteem among their people.
One of these great leaders was Sri Narayana Guru, who came from the age of a caste in Kerala. He proclaimed this revolutionary idea: one caste, one religion, one God for humankind. His argument was that all of humanity belonged to a single caste. This directly attacked the very foundation of the whole discriminatory system.
A major battlefront in this fight was the temple entry movement. Led by incredible figures like Dr. B.R.M. Baker, these movements fought for the right of untouchables to enter Hindu temples. This was a direct assault on segregation and became a powerful symbol in the fight for equality for all.
So after decades of tireless work by all these reformers, men and women from all different walks of life, what's the legacy they left behind? How did all their struggles shape the India we see today?
Well, here's the crucial point. Their legacy is all around us. The banning of sati, the legal right for widows to remarry, laws against child marriage, the very foundation of education for women, and the constitutional rights that are guaranteed for all citizens no matter their caste. These things weren't just given, they were fought for, inch by inch.
You know, the story of these reformers is such a powerful reminder that societies can and absolutely do change for the better. They stared down the deepest injustices of their world and laid the groundwork for a new one. And that kind of leaves us with a question to think about, doesn't it? What are the injustices of our time, and how will we challenge them?